Welcome to another episode of Going Homesteady. If you remember last time we were together, I asked this question: who are you going to call? Well, today I'd like us to ask another question: what time is it? Because Jesus himself told us how important it is for us to be able to discern the times. I want you to consider this contrast between Joshua during the time of the conquest of the Promised Land and Daniel during the time of the exile. Joshua was commanded to put to death every man, woman, and child in the land. And Daniel is praised for faithfully serving under multiple emperors over the biggest powers of the day. Well, those are two different strategies, both of which seem to have God's blessing on them. And they're different because the circumstances and the situations are different. Well, that's why we need to know what time it is. Or is it a Joshua time? Is it a Daniel time? Is it some other kind of time? Well, there's a young man named Aaron Wren. He's a pastor, and he has written a few pieces trying to answer this question of what time it is, particularly with respect to the relationship between Christians in this culture and Christians in relation to the culture. How does the culture look at Christians, and how should the Christians look at culture? And what he did is he suggested that there has been, in the last 80 years, three different phases that describe that relationship. There was, according to him, from 1938, I believe, to 1994, what he called the positive times. And what positive means in this context is that the broader culture generally saw Christians and Christianity as a positive thing. That doesn't mean that everybody was Christian. It doesn't mean they didn't have disagreements. But overall, it was a positive thing. If you were a politician during this time period, it was important for you to present yourself as a Christian one way or another. You embraced the Christian heritage of the nation. It was a positive thing. And if you were a member of the community, it was expected that you would be a part of one of the churches in the community. This included an era, maybe more in the 50s, where we had what was called the rise of civil religion, which it was nominal Christianity, but where, you've heard that expression where everybody, because they were Americans, described themselves as Christians, even if they never darkened the door of a church or never cracked open a Bible. That's the positive time, and it's a long time ago. But it lasted for a long time, and for many of us, it was the backdrop of our upbringing. But the argument goes from around 1994, and these years are not hard and fast, but from around 1994 to 2014, we had an era that was described as neutral, where Christianity wasn't looked at by the broader culture as a negative thing, but it wasn't either looked at as any kind of positive thing, not at all. The perspective was neutral. Wren gives this illustration that when 9/11 happened, the attack of Muslim terrorists against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and other attempts that were going on, there was again a upswing of civil religion, and there was it was okay for the president to invoke prayer and the name of God in these things. But at the same time, within a week of the events, President Bush was attending some sort of service at a massive Muslim mosque, and doing so with the intent to communicate to not just Muslims, but to the whole of the United States of, hey, we're not against Muslims. So this is how you get kind of neutral, this neutral time period from 1994 to 2014. Well, what happened just after 2014? In 2015 was the Supreme Court's Obergefell decision, which decision, like Roe v. Wade, overturned the law in various and sundry states. Only this time, the law in the states that was overturned was the law against same-sex marriages. Supreme Court finally said, we don't care what you states think. We're embracing same-sex marriage. It's going to be legal. Everybody's got to recognize everybody else's marriages in different states. And that was the beginning, really, of a significant hostility from the culture to the church. Now, in all these different time frames, there are different responses that different Christians have had along the way. Typically speaking, the more progressive a particular church might be or institution might be, the more it's going to embrace uh, the cultural spirit of the age. Uh, on the other spectrum, the more fundamentalist a church or institution is, the more it's going to be in a position of combat with the broader culture. In the middle are the evangelicals who want, at one and the same time, to maintain biblical fidelity without unduly offending the world around us. Well, different approaches, again, are more problematic in different time periods. When the culture is more warm towards Christianity, fundamentalism can unduly offend those who are still outside. When the world is embracing progressivism and the church is following along, then we've completely lost our witness. I saw today a tweet from an old friend of mine who said something like this: no one was ever brought into the kingdom by someone who preached a compromised gospel. This is why I'm saying we need to understand what time it is, because, as we've said, we've admitted from the beginning, we don't want this to be all politics all the time, or even mostly politics most of the time. But we do want people to understand the kind of times that we're in. And part of dealing with that, well, let me put it this way. Since 2014, there have been two books that made quite a splash among Protestants seeking to wrestle with a biblical view of how to look at the broader culture. One of them was called the Benedict option, and the other was called the Boniface option. The Benedict option was something that looked at the broader culture and said, look, we're beaten, we're defeated. We need to learn how to live in exile or learn how to live as a despised minority. The other position, the Boniface option, was much more aggressive. The first was more Daniel, if you will, and the second was more Joshua. The Boniface option, you may know this about Boniface. He was a missionary to Germany after there had already been some missionaries, but the German people, this is back in the, I don't know how long ago it was, back in the Middle Ages, uh, there had been some embrace of Christianity, but it had fallen into a syncretism where the Saxons not only worshipped Jesus, but they worshipped their ancestors and they worshipped Thor, and in fact they even had a kind of pine forest where they worshipped, and one of the trees low down represented Jesus and his cross, and the tallest tree represented Thor. Well, Boniface, whose heart was broken by this, decided the best thing to do was not to argue with these people and try to help them understand why Jesus is more important, but instead he took his axe and he cut down the tree, the Thor tree. And again, it wasn't out of anger, but he did teach these Saxons this lesson. They realized, wait a minute. I mean, they watched him do this. They didn't even try to stop him because they understood, look, if this missionary for Jesus can chop down this tree and Thor doesn't stop him, maybe Thor's not all that. So he did. So that's the Boniface option, is much more aggressive, much more going after what's wrong in the culture, and those places where the culture is at odds with the church. The sort of in between places where, again, one of the most common things that we do to not lose influence is we simply silence ourselves. We silence ourselves as we interact with the culture around us so that they don't know where we're coming from, so that they don't reject us. We don't want to lose our opportunity for witness. Just recently, I was made aware of a pastor for whom I have enormous respect, who served for decades faithfully in the church, who gave some really bad counsel. A woman asked about a grandchild who was going to be uh, getting married to someone of the same sex that they were. And this pastor that I respect so much encouraged this grandma to go, because he said if she doesn't go, then all she'll do is confirm in the mind of the grandchild, well, this is how mean and ugly and hard hearted these Christians are. So just believe all you like that this is wrong, but don't let anybody know. Really bad counsel, and it really disappointed me. But again, that's one of the ways that we try to respond to being set apart, or being at odds with the broader culture. Now, some would say that homesteading itself is a kind of Benedict option. Benedict uh, uh, started Benedictine monasteries where the people retreated. They saw that they were in a bad way, they saw that they were outnumbered, and they retreated into their monasteries. They built their walls, and they tried to have their own distinct, separate subculture and kind of survive. That's the Benedict option. Well, one could argue, well, isn't that what homesteading is? People are going off by themselves out into the country, big tracts of land, uh, unpacking dependency on the broader culture, and therefore you're trying to hide. Well, yes and no. There is value and there is biblical language about being called out from the broader world. These monastics, I think they were wrong, but they weren't foolish. They weren't stupid. God said, come out from them. But he didn't mean to a different place geographically. What he meant was, don't embrace the mindset, don't embrace the worldview of the world. Now, one of the challenges, one of the of living in the world is, well, you've heard the expression, does a fish know it's wet? Does a fish know it's wet? Now, the fish is in the water, but the fish was born in the water. The fish has always lived in the water. The fish doesn't know anything other than water. In the broader culture, for so many Christians, we don't know anything different, and it seems normal to us. Like we talked about when we talked about how we forget the connection between our work and our food. That seems normal to us, but it's really historically very unusual and also unhelpful. So, part of what we're engaged in here is trying to at least step out enough to begin to recognize the wetness of the water all around us. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the homesteading, and one of the reasons as well why we're doing this series on YouTube, to try to help you also think through these issues as we think through these issues. Now, I am looking forward to soon having more practical things. I want to talk soon about the blessings of splitting wood. I want to again talk to Lisa about the wisdom of her thinking through the canning and the garden and all these things. But it's going to be a while before we get to do that springtime stuff. We're still here in the winter and we're surrounded by snow, which we're grateful for. I'm not sure how soon we'll be able to go out and celebrate the blessings of cross country skiing. which is on our agenda. Maybe that's something we can talk about on a future episode. But for now, let's remember that at least, at the very least, these things that we've been talking about are good things for us to be talking about and thinking about and wrestling through. What time is it? How bad is it? And what is God's call on our lives in these particular circumstances? He's not, I assure you, calling us to capitulate. He's also, however, not calling us to take up arms. The kingdom doesn't come with a sword. The kingdom comes as we walk by faith, as we live as a city distinct from the world, but a city on a hill being seen by the world. So please keep with us. And, well, you know the rest of the story. I want you to continue to tune in. I want you to hit that like button. I want you to subscribe. I want you to share this. I want your comments. I'd love to hear. Maybe you've read the Boniface option. Maybe you've read the uh, other one. His name's escaping me. The Benedict option. Maybe you've got some thoughts on this. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to see some discussion, some back and forth. So it's not just us talking to you. Talk back. Let's have some comments and some discussion there. And as always, again, we want you to share, send this to your friends. Let's talk together about what time it is and what it is that our Heavenly Father has called us to do.